Hello, everyone, and welcome to Life After the Military, a show completely focused on veterans transitioning from military to civilian life. Our show is powered by Pivotal Moments, a nonprofit on a mission to strengthen mental fitness for all. Go check them out at pivotalmoments.org to learn more. My name is Lee Elias, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Howie Cohen, and we are privileged today to have Ash Alexander-Cooper with us. Ash is a veteran of 21 years of military service as an officer in the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense, with multiple assignments worldwide in the Gurkha, as a helicopter pilot, and as specialist military units. Ash, a highly accomplished military leader, received special recognition with his appointment as an officer of the Order of the British Empire. After retiring from the military, Ash spent over 2 years working with McChrystal Group as a leadership and management consultant and has additional consulting experience with EGM Networks and Gatehouse Advisory Partners. Ash is currently a highly sought-after public speaker on the topics of leadership and resilience and has recently taken a role as the chief commercial officer of a cutting-edge tech startup. Ash, welcome to Life After the Military.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, listen, man, the pleasure is all ours. It's always nice to have someone that's not just from the USA and served in a different capacity. And as we said, you had an exceptional 21-year career as an officer in the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense with multiple assignments worldwide. Please share with us and their audience some of the things you did in those 21 years and how those experiences molded and shaped you into the person that you are today.
Sure. So I started life in the Army, in the British Army within the UK MOD. And I chose, when I finished officer training after that first year, to join a unit, as you mentioned, called the Gurkhas. And for those who aren't familiar, all the soldiers come from Nepal. So one of the first jobs we had was to learn Nepalese, which was pretty fun. And Gurkhas are light infantry soldiers specializing in airborne operations and jungle warfare operations. So some of the early years of my formative part of my career were learning jungle warfare skills in Borneo and Brunei and Belize and jungle places like that, which was fascinating. One of the real perks of being a Gurkha officer is that you get to visit Nepal and trek to help you learn the language and learn the culture. So I spent, again, some formative times in the hills of Nepal, trekking, working on welfare projects and trying to help understand how we could better connect with those from where they came in that country. After doing a few tours in Bosnia and a few in Northern Ireland, I then decided I wanted to change or would like to kind of try something new. I've always been one of those people who likes to learn new things and new skills. So I selected or tried to be selected to become a helicopter pilot and did that for a few years, working in sort of counter-terrorist roles, flying different types of helicopters, mainly the Lynx helicopter, which I know the US doesn't have, but it's sort of a smaller Black Hawk, I guess, kind of as a sort of size comparison, and spent a number of years doing that before moving into some sort of more grown-up, let's say, strategy roles and joint operational roles. Spent a lot of time with the US, actually. So although I'm not from the US, I've spent a lot of time in the US, and I can speak American if I need to.
Southern. Right, we can speak English if you want to.
But I spent a lot of time deployed with US and NATO forces. Spent about 7 years deployed altogether on operational tours, and I've been, like I said, shoulder to shoulder with my Afghan brothers and sisters many times, and helped carry US caskets and been to ramp ceremonies where we've lost coalition partners on those jobs. So I feel very connected to the US. And my last job actually in the military, in my regular service, because I'm still in the Army Reserve, but the last job in my regular service was actually in the British Embassy in Washington, because I was seen by the UK at least as the US guy. So spent some time there.
Hey, so Ash, I haven't had the privilege to have worked with you for a couple of years, and we'll talk about your consulting role here in a little bit. I know you have a spectacular capability, so many talents and abilities that you share with me as I got to know you, and I will tell the audience, an incredibly accomplished leader. I got to see that firsthand for about 2 years when we both worked with the McChrystal Group, doing leadership and management consulting. But what I want to focus on now, Ash, is as you then transitioned out of your military career, and it was about the 2016 timeframe, what I'd like you to share with the audience, because what we want to do is kind of help them prepare for transitions to life after the military. You know, what did you do to help yourself plan and prepare for that transition? You may share with us what went well, what did not go well. And as you look back on it, if there's anything that you think you might do differently, that you know, something that you've learned that you wish you had done that maybe the audience can leverage and learn from as well, I would sure appreciate you sharing that with them.
Sure. Before I do that, I'll just push back on the accomplished comment. Americans are always so complimentary and kind. I'm not that accomplished, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have been shot or blown up, or all the things that happened to me in my career. That's not. Listen, that's humility coming out, which you find in all great leaders. But I will tell you, Ash is an incredible athlete. And he's been a highly competitive athlete. He is a musician, a singer. So there is so much more to this man than just his military experience and background. So I'm very confident in what I stated, Ash. I'm very confident in what I said. How we all have former in front of them now, so that's all. But to answer your question specifically, I think, you know, when I retired in 2016 from active duty, the things that I really look back on, and I'm glad that I had done, not only through my career, but just generally in life, was think about networks and relationships. And everybody I've ever worked with or ever had a reason to have a relationship with professionally, you know, I've always I've been that kind of guy that stayed in touch, or made a note of who they are, or put them in my address book, or in today's, connected world, always made a connection on LinkedIn. Every meeting, and I still do that now, every meeting I've ever had with somebody, I'll always look and see if I can find a way to connect, say thank you, ask if there's any way I can help them in the future if they've helped me in that particular meeting. So I would say anybody thinking about leaving, leverage your network, because we all had a military or have a military network, but not all of our friends are military, or I imagine most people have a more diverse friend group than just those in uniform. And it was talking to all of those friends who'd never served a day in uniform and asking them how they thought about their professional lives and finding work that was really helpful to me. And I mean, I was extremely lucky that when I left, I went from roles that saw me working with interesting people, doing interesting things in interesting places. And that didn't really change. I was very lucky with my first job out of uniform, you know, with McChrystal Group, working with a lot of clients internationally, helping them with some of their trickiest problems, using my brain, trying to think of how we could solve the problems with the experience I brought that was very different from that commercial world they were in. But we're all leaders and had the same challenges, albeit with different language and, you know, acronyms and whatever. So that bit of trying to canvas as widely as possible to ask as many people as I could about their experience and their journey. And, you know, they clearly had learned lessons that I would rather not have to learn myself by making mistakes, or as many mistakes as was likely, trying to forge a new path. I think that the challenge for people coming out of the military is that, you know, certainly in the UK, you know, you move from posting to posting every 2 to 3 years, or 2.5 years as a kind of standard posting time, and you can go from completely different jobs. So you get used to that variety of life that a military career gives you. And not all the, you know, maybe it is changing now. I see certainly in the commercial space, not least with cool new startups and different opportunities coming online all the time. But traditionally, you would have to kind of pick which company you're going to go with and sort of accept and plan for a career or a second career in that kind of more structured world. And I've seen a lot of my friends do brilliantly, really, really well going into big companies, established companies, and have just accepted that it's going to take time for them to go to the top. I'm probably less, having come from an institution as the military, I still feel that I'm probably not best suited for those big corporate sort of structures. Maybe I never was. Maybe that's why I was always in trouble in my military life. But I think don't let the conversations you have outside curtail your desire to learn new things and think about moving. And that was probably a big transition in mindset to realize that it's okay to go to a company and learn some stuff, and then realize that actually there are other things you want to do, or other things that a different job might offer you, and that's okay. And definitely my civilian friends said, I don't know why you're worried about only doing 2 years. I think, well, I want to demonstrate that I'm committed and I'm loyal, and I want to go somewhere and this is going to be it. I can be happy there. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not the reality. So I think have an open mind is probably the main thing, and cultivate your networks early. It's never too soon to start the conversations over coffee with people about what they've learned and how they've found that transition themselves.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I make when that point comes out, I love to reinforce it, because I completely agree that the ability to develop and cultivate your network that's what's going to find you the job. I remember going through the transition assistance program, which is what we had in the U.S. military, and that's probably the single most important point they made, is that as you start preparing yourself, develop your network contact list, list all the people that have recently gotten out, their names, their email addresses, their phone numbers, and connect with them, because that's where you're going to most likely find your job. So that's great. That's great advice, and you continue to reinforce that is probably the single most important thing that a veteran can do to have a successful transition.
I mean, some other friends also recommended that I read a book that I think is still going, called What Color is Your Parachute? And it was sold to me as being this kind of epiphany moment that when you've gone through the exercise in the book, it'll sort of spit out, here is the job that is perfect for you. That's not what it does. But what it did do for me that was quite helpful was allow me to kind of pragmatically go through and rule out all those things that I kind of toyed with the idea of, oh, maybe I would be okay in financial services, knowing that that's not something that's ever really, gripped me, fascinated me, or energized me. And when you go through some of the exercises in that book, and I'm sure there are others that are similar, what it does do is narrow down those things that definitely are not what you would like to do, either by location, by sort of family, life-work balance, or whatever those things might be. And I encourage people, if they haven't read anything, then I certainly found that to be quite a useful book, although it didn't do quite what I assumed. But that's my fault for not having read the cover before I started digging into it.
Hey, Ash, as you look back on it, though, anything you wish you had done differently, now that you've got several years, of post-military experience, and you've been very successful in everything you've done, anything that you wish you had done differently that might have positively affected the outcome?
I suppose the only thing is thinking more about some of those qualifications that might be transferable. I learned a ton of things in the military, high altitude parachuting. There's not much call for that in London to be, on oxygen, jumping at 29,000 feet into your office. So that was pretty unhelpful. Or jungle warfare. I haven't done any jungle warfare since I left yet, but who knows? So I think just with today's, I think the world is different now from when I was certainly thinking about getting out in my formative years of learning skills in the military. There was much less thought given to how that might translate to something usefully in the civilian world. I think that has changed. I've seen that certainly in the UK, that after the year of officer training that we do at Sandhurst, the equivalent at West Point, there is now a civilian management and leadership qualification that comes on the back of that, which didn't exist when we were there. It's just like, okay, you spent a year at Sandhurst. What does that mean? Don't really understand it. So I think it would have been helpful for me, now that I work in tech quite heavily, to have done more tech-related courses at the time. But of course, I didn't know that's where I was going to end up. But the one course that I did do, or the one thing that, and I do advise other people thinking about this, is that when we were resettling, you got a certain amount of a small allowance to go and do a few courses that might be your resettlement courses. And one of them was a kind of a mini MBA. It wasn't a full MBA, but it was a kind of certificate of business administration that one could do. And there were a couple of fixed schools that a lot of the military folks would go to, partly because I was in the States and I couldn't do those schools, but partly because people advised me that you've got to stand out. So trying to find something that makes you slightly different from every other, officer or soldier or sailor or airman or whoever that has come out with, glowing military reports or service reports. If you're all, top third and high achievers in that, how do you differentiate yourself from those others who are also equally worthy of having job interviews and being remembered by potential employers? And what I did, which I really am so grateful for having the opportunity to do, was a certificate of business administration at Georgetown, because I happen to be working in the embassy. And it obviously doesn't have to be Georgetown. It doesn't have to be a certificate of business administration. But that was by far and away the thing on my resume when I had interviews that people picked up on. Oh, I see you were in this job, but you also did this extra thing. Now, for me, it was evenings and weekends. So, I could fit it around my day job. But that was something that allowed employers to not only talk about, but for me and my own confidence, I could at least then talk in business terms a little bit more confidently about businesses and, budgets and P&L and all that stuff, which wasn't anything that I'd had to deal with in my uniform days.
Ash, you're bringing up a bunch of great points, and Howie echoed some of them too. I'll tell you, the advice you're giving right now is great for anyone, not just people leaving the military, but in terms of networking and looking around and, pivotal moments. The whole mission here behind Charlie Mike and Pivotal Moments is, to break that stigma behind mental fitness, mental health. And I think something you said earlier in the show that I want to tap on really quick is that you had an understanding of, if you don't want to do something, to not keep pursuing it. And I think that is part of the issue when it comes to mental health, and that stigma of you gotta stick with it. And again, I can understand, and I'll explain why in a minute, how men and women that serve have that type of mentality, right? Because you kind of have to be that way in the armed forces, right? Again, my wife served. I'll tell you in a minute, I was really blessed to volunteer to help out the Royal Air Force when I lived in England. But when you leave, and I always equate this is like the equivalent of going to college or university. If you pick a major, or for your case, a job, and you hate it, switch the job and switch the major. Don't stick with something you're going to hate. Now, again, there's a big difference between something being hard and challenging and something you just don't want to do. All right. If it's hard and challenging, service people are not going to have a problem probably conquering that. If it's something you don't want to do, or you don't know where you fit into that, it can be insanely painful. And holding on to this idea that you have to do it is not really great for your mental fitness. So you mentioned that, and I wanted to reiterate that. Another thing I wanted to do real quick, especially for our American listeners, as I said, I had the privilege to live in the UK for 3 years while my wife served. And during that time, I volunteered to do a lot of stuff with the Royal Air Force and ice hockey. I met a lot of friends. In fact, I still work with some of these guys. But the thing that amazed me when I lived there was two things, right? One is that I realized that Americans don't tend to realize the size of the United Kingdom. From Isle of Wight to the top of Scotland, really the habitable area is about 9-10 hours, right? Drive from the bottom to the top, right? And it's even less when you go east to west. So it's basically the size of a few northeastern states, right? And I think that's important for Americans to understand, because the military men and women that serve in the United Kingdom are just as passionate, just as loyal, just as dedicated, and just as efficient as our armed service men and women, right? But there's this kind of misunderstanding on that. The other thing too that I found, and this actually bothered me a little bit, was that, the armed services in the UK are not as revered, in my opinion, by the people as they are in the United States. And I learned that one night. I was working for a hockey team, and I wanted to do a military appreciation night. And there were kind of looks around the room of that had never been done before, right? And I said, "What's the big deal?" They go, we don't do that a lot here. And we did it, and I was talking to the people that were there. We had representatives from every branch, both American and UK, and they really told me stories of let's just say armed service people are treated a little bit differently in the UK. I don't want to knock anything, but it's just not the same as it is.
Yeah,
here
it's a different relationship. Right. I think the most telling one that I've seen is, Americans assume that when you retire, you get your veterans card and you get VA, equivalent sort of free healthcare and all this sort of stuff. I mean, that just doesn't exist. When you leave, well, it's changing now. But certainly when I retired, you hand in your CAC equivalent or military ID card, and you're told to hand in all your gear, and then please leave. And that's kind of it. You're just another civilian. That is changing. Yeah. We've had our first Minister of Veterans about 2 years ago, I think, started, and that's a new office in government. And there's a lot more effort now looking at how employers can get benefits for employing. They get sort of tax breaks for employing veterans when they leave. And there's a lot more care and support, particularly in the mental health and mental fitness space now, to try and ensure that we better look after our people who have, given and paid so much for their service, whether it's mental or physical.
Right.
It's what we can do. But certainly it is a different relationship. And
well,
I found it strange when I came to America. If I had to travel in uniform anywhere, and people are just stopping me in the street and thank you for your service. And I found that very awkward and kind of unusual because it's just not something that we are familiar with.
It's not. First off, I'm glad to hear that it's changing. And I wanted to say this too, because this is one of the things I found amazing. When we did do that military appreciation night, we had all the guys on the ice and they got a very long standing ovation from the audience. And a lot of them teared up. And I remember they came to me afterwards. And like I said, this has nothing to do with credit or anything like that. But they were thanking me because they had never experienced that before. And I told them, don't thank me, thank you, right? And the key was the people really did care. They just had never been given the opportunity to show that. You know what I mean? And when we created that, it exhibited that. So I just found that to be unique.
Just one word of warning or caution though. Don't because aren't those sort of very obvious overt displays of appreciation at soccer games or whatever. That doesn't mean that there is a lesser view of the military. There's still nationally a lot of pride in our armed forces, but the way we show it is just more British, perhaps.
That's fair. No, and I know exactly what you mean by that. And look, that's the point I was trying to make, is that different countries experience their armed forces differently. And number one, thank you for volunteering. Thank you for the time you've done that, even though I know that's awkward for you to hear. But I just wanted to share that because, again, we should tell that to our audience. This is a different process depending on where you live, and we're thankful to have a different perspective today. So as we mentioned in the open, Ash, once you were out, you did spend 2 years working with the McChrystal Group as a leadership and management consultant, and that included standing up their leadership academy and their European office, which was located in London. And again, we also mentioned you have additional experience consulting with EGM Networks and Gatehouse Advisory Partners. Tell us a little bit about what you do as a consultant and how you leverage your military experience to accomplish that job.
Fundamentally, and Howie will know this, we've worked together quite often. As a consultant, you find yourself, if you can develop a trusted relationship and partnership with your client, you become a therapist, honestly, pretty quickly, because they feel that you're somebody outside of their chain of command or the equivalent, their line management, and they can be pretty open and honest with you about what actually is or isn't working. And so I found it hugely enjoyable to just connect with people. I've always enjoyed the people business, whether that's in or out of uniform. Working with clients and friends and partners is what makes, gives me meaning and a reason to go to work when you'll get that energy and solving problems, complex problems together. But the therapy bit, allowed you to kind of explore with your experience that is very different, clearly, from a lot of these folks that you're working with. And unpick the problems that they've been unable to see a solution for based on their experience. So you get to think analytically about complex problems. And I think coming from the military, where so much of what we did and do is in the gray space where answers aren't clear and you don't have all the facts. I mean, the reason when you give military orders, certainly in the UK, the common phrase about it is, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So when you deliver your orders, the first small chunk of it is, this is what we'd like to happen, and this is the plan. But then you spend most of the time going through all the contingencies of when it goes to hell in a handcart, this is how you're going to fix it. So you're immediately, the moment you leave for that mission, you are expecting it not to work. You hope it will, obviously, and you plan for it to work, but you are kind of ready for it not to work like that. And your mindset, therefore, is one about adaptability. Not only, you become resilient to realizing that not all plans work, but you're able faster and faster to adapt to the situation around you. And I think that's what we brought often in the consulting space, was an analytical view where we could think and look at complex problems with in a different way, from a different lens, and be more comfortable with what would need to be done and help them think about adapting. Because, startups have disrupted traditional companies, and when those startups become successful, they'll be disrupted by the next thing and the next thing. So everybody needs to be adaptable ultimately in life. Look at COVID. The companies I've spoken to and done speeches with recently, if I told any of them, February, March 2020, from next week, by the way, you're no longer going to be able to go to your office, so what you've left in the office is stuck there for who knows how long. you're going to have to stay at home, but continue to grow our business. And by the way, you're going to have to homeschool your kids. Everybody would have said impossible. Right. Yet everybody, or most people have got through it, and some are even still smiling. You know, we've found a way to adapt and learn and grow and build our own resilience. And that's what I think we bring often as military leaders to the commercial space, is an innate understanding of leadership. And as long as we have to then and can adapt our language and experience to the commercial space, I think it's a really powerful relationship that we can develop with our partners, and everybody can see growth and success come from that.
I'll tell you two quick things. One is that the world needs more leaders like you and Howie right now that can adapt, and they can keep it from becoming politicized and keep it from becoming what it doesn't need to be. And another thing is one of my favorite athletic quotes from Mike Tyson is, everyone's got a plan, they get punched in the face. And it's just so true. And I think that that's an amazing point you bring up, is that, look, planning is important, but you have to be adaptable for everybody. And when we think about transitioning from the military, no matter what plan you make, you better be ready to be adaptable, right? Because it's not going to go most likely the way you think it's going to go, from an emotional standpoint, a physical standpoint, a logistical standpoint, so forth and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a lot of folks about, what does it mean to be adaptable? And I'm sure there are probably, definitions in the dictionary that are more academic and clever than mine. But, for me, it's about the ability, if you want to be resilient, it's adapting and learning in the face of adversity. That's what resilience is. So
that's awesome.
And within the adaptability space, it's a kind of intersection between innovation and agility. If you think about a complex problem that inherently is unpredictable, that's why it's complex rather than complicated. That if you're trying to apply new solutions slowly, you'll fail. You're not agile, but you're innovative. That's not great. But if you are really fast and agile, but you're applying old solutions to new problems, you'll probably fail. So it's that intersection between agility and innovation where you can be really creative and adaptable. And those are the companies that I've seen during COVID. Many have actually doubled down on their plans. There are some who kind of looked at the problem and thought, wow, we don't even know how many people we can employ and whatever. And they've been, for all sorts of right reasons, many companies have had to pull back on their plans and slow down and cut or whatever. But some of the companies I've seen just absolutely smash it during COVID. They said, right, here's an opportunity. Let's think about what a crisis is. It is 50% opportunity. 50% is absolutely risk and threat. But if you think if your mindset is one of, let's look for the opportunities that exist in complexity, you can get a march on all your competitors. And some of the companies said, right, we're doubling down. We're speeding up this program that we had planned to roll out in 2022. Let's start now, because who knows where this is going to go. And they've absolutely crushed it. So having the confidence to just try, as long as you learn from it. And that's the same with, looking for jobs and transitioning. As long as you can learn from any mistake you make, it's worth doing, because you'll be better for having made those mistakes and learned than never having made them and just got every job you wanted every time. Because when a problem does hit you, it's going to hit you really hard.
So Ash, one of the things I really try to do here is to bring guests that have varied experiences from what they've done, not only in the military but in their post-military career. And you're the first one that really we've had that had a really strong consulting background. And I appreciate you bringing those points out, because I think these are great opportunities for someone who sees as the right fit for them to consider that when they look to develop their post-military career. Because I do think there's so much you can leverage from your military experience and bring that to the corporate or the business world that can bring so much value. And I've seen you do that when we work together at McChrystal Group. When you transition then from that primary consulting effort, you then went to work for Palantir Technologies, and you focused on building strategic partnerships. You were building out an international business, capability and developing business for them. How about sharing with the audience what you did for Palantir, and again, what could our audience learn from that experience that you gained in that position?
Yeah, well, it kind of, before I get into that, it's sort of the way that job came about was kind of back to one of my very early points about the network and relationships. This job came sort of across my desk, as it were, through a friend who had been headhunted, within his network, and he said, have you heard about these guys? I'd heard the name, but didn't know much about them. And then through other network connections, it transpired that there was a sort of a mutual connection in the leadership, and had a meeting and a few meetings and interviews and whatever, and then joined. What I was used for there wasn't dissimilar in some ways to the consulting world, or the military world, where we were kind of troubleshooters, I guess, where there was a problem or something that needed energizing, or looking at new solutions or ways we could expand or grow or develop what might already be there as a kernel of an idea or a theater or market. So I was sort of fired around the world looking at different things and spent a lot of time commuting from London to Australia, which was interesting. But again, it was working with interesting people solving really complex problems for clients. And I'm not ever going to be good/able at all to code in any meaningful way. So my strength wasn't in that I was going to be a tech ninja that could do anything like that. But what I could bring was how we can pull teams together, how we think about just going and using the network. And I did that with the countries I went into. Was the first thing was go through my kind of electronic Rolodex and go, right, who do I know who might be helpful in, may not be the right guy or girl immediately, but with this network, and we've got credibility and trust from having built that trust over years, that let's leverage that and see if this could be useful to that company. So a lot of the time was spent really, again, the same kind of deal of leveraging networks, using those relationships and developing them, from many years spent previously to see how you can then work on those particular products. And one thing I learned as well is that when you think less about clients and more about partners in the business space, that's where trust can really grow quickly. And I found people who are my clients, from previous companies, when I move, they keep asking, what are you doing now? Let me know what it is, because I might want to get that as well. So they're sort of buying you almost in a way, because they trust you and the way you've behaved with them in the past. That can actually help go through your entire career. And when I was at McChrystal, you might remember this, Howie, that there was one deal we had that was an easy few $100,000 for something, and we kind of were made aware that actually this wasn't the thing that we wanted to do, because the company was going to, the other client company was going to provide that capability in a different way for that guy. He was desperate to sign because he wanted to start. We said, no, don't sign. And the head office was so grateful that we hadn't just gone for the easy dollars, that it led to a much bigger contract over many years with them, because we built the trust. We'd proven that we weren't there just to make a quick buck, that we were interested in that relationship and the partnership. And that's really what the Palantir work was as well. It's just developing those international relationships that I'm, still leveraging now with the new company. Wherever I go, these things are in some cases 20 years old, these people that I've worked with, or the relationships are 20 years old. And that's valuable.
Yeah, that and I completely concur. I think a combination of developing trusted relationships, thinking long term, not thinking short term, which you just described with the experience with McChrystal Group, and also believing in whatever product or service that you're representing. Right, if you truly believe in what you have to offer, and that it can bring value to your client, then I think that makes this a lot more effective as well. No, I completely agree with everything you just said, and really valuable points for our audience to leverage. So Ash, I want to kind of take a shift, because I know you've been very engaged with an organization called the Unsung Foundation. You have a leadership role with that foundation, and what I really would appreciate you taking some time to do is tell us about the Unsung Foundation. Its mission, what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to build. I think it's a really important effort that you're involved in, and I'd love for you to take some time to share and educate our audience about it.
Sure. So, the Unsung Foundation is a charity, and I'll probably just start a little preamble by saying, when I retired, I wanted to give back. I feel very lucky that even though I've been, shot and blown up and survived a few helicopter crashes, and a suicide bomber tried to kill me on my birthday once, I've seen a lot of trauma, lost maybe 70, possibly even 80 friends and colleagues killed, and know many hundreds more wounded, both US and UK and others. Luckily and very fortunately, I don't feel like I'm affected by that mentally. I'm physically not quite what I was, which is my excuse for running slow marathons now, which is fine. It's quite handy. But no, I'm very lucky that the trauma that I experienced hasn't led to my life being affected by it day to day in a debilitating way. So when I left, I started helping a number of different charities that are focused on the mental health space, and I still, am ambassador for them, and I still love what they do. But my sort of experience of the charity sector was disappointing in the sense that I was really expecting everybody to be more of a club where they all helped each other and thought much more collaboratively and inclusively about charity. And that isn't generally the case. With one charity I was supporting a few years ago, they were taken to court by another charity that was a much bigger charity, threatening them with legal action because they used an image that this other charity had decided that they owned. It was not an image actually that anybody owns. It's of a particular flower, another poppy, associated with remembrance. So it was a bit ridiculous. But I just thought, we're all trying to help the same demographic here. How can you be wasting money and causing this smaller charity pain and suffering and financial cost? It blew my mind. So the Unsung is designed to be slightly different. The Unsung is a global charity established here in the UK, but we're 501c3 pending in the US as well. And what I wanted it to be, because I'm founder and sort of helped set it up with a few friends, is that it's a global charity to support not just the military, but all those who serve. And the idea being that, service is special and important. And whether you're a doctor, a nurse, a Coast Guard, a firefighter, a law enforcement officer, we're all serving in different capacities. And the reason I call them unsung is because if you imagine, if you're driving later on, if you're in DC, you're going on the Beltway, before you get in your vehicle, you don't call the fire service to check that they've got enough, fire trucks with cutting equipment if you got in a wreck, and the police have got enough cars to close the road so no other cars drive into you, and the paramedics are fully trained, they've done all their qualifications for this year. If you get in a wreck, you just expect all these other people to turn up. And by the way, the military are still deployed doing their stuff day in, day out. So we want to kind of make this more of an inclusive community that thinks more about sharing and helping each other rather than in a linear charity by charity way, because certainly in the UK, I see a lot of people falling between the cracks in care between charities in the charity sector, and we can do better. So the idea of the Unsung is we don't deliver any services ourselves, but we will be the vehicle to raise awareness and fundraising for the charities that are delivering great work, because the last thing the world needs is yet another military charity, right? There's plenty of them all over the world. The US has hundreds of thousands of them, I think. So we want to be a way where people can obviously donate to us, and then charities can apply, whether they're big or small. We want this to be fair, equitable, transparent. So whether you're a small charity providing art therapy for nurses, or animal therapy, writing for military folks, or whatever it might be, whether you do 10 people or 1,000 people a year, it doesn't matter. You should apply for the money you think you need. And the three criteria people will have to sort of pass through these gates to kind of be eligible is: tell us how much they want and what it's going to be spent on. Secondly, how they're going to measure the impact of that donation or money that's going to them. And thirdly, and perhaps the most importantly, based on what I just told you, is tell us how they're going to collaborate with others in that space. Because not least during COVID, there are a ton of charities that are really struggling right now that still deliver really critical care that the system doesn't, but they're on their last gasp. They're running out of money. So we can maybe actually perform a kind of matchmaking function as well, where we see 3 small charities all delivering art therapy. Let's get them together to think about how they can actually support each other. And if one of them's full, rather than telling the potential client, come back in 6 months when we have vacancy, actually go across to my buddy's charity here, or go into a different sector. The health charity I know down the road, they have beds or they have spaces. So we want to think more collaboratively about that. Year one, we had plans pre-COVID typically to do a bunch of international connected concerts that was going to be kind of live aid but using 21st century technology with augmented reality, virtual reality, whatever. So you could be on the stage with the bands and, really nicely connected, which Live Aid didn't enjoy it in the same way. Clearly COVID put paid to that. So year one for us now is to make a feature-length documentary telling the stories of the unsung from around the world. The thread being, with all these different stories, trauma and service, because as you well know, trauma doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care your nationality, your orientation, your gender, your language, the color of your uniform, color of your skin, any of that. So the stories of whether you're a New South Wales firefighter in Australia, traumatized from putting burning animals out of the bush in the last, bushfires, or you're a 9/11 fire chief who's traumatized from, pulling bodies out of the Twin Towers, or a nurse in Houston who's traumatized from having the entire hospital staff, be affected by COVID. Whatever it might be, the thread will be trauma and service. We want to shine a light on that. It'll be uplifting. It'll be tragic. It'll be inspiring. All those things within the doc. We're going to do a book as well. We've already built a community platform that people can come and find resources and get help if they need it, from both curated sort of official responses, but also from the community themselves, because I think a lot of these solutions are going to come from the community. So that's kind of Unsung in maybe a slightly long-winded nutshell, but we just want to help as many people as we can in a much more inclusive way than exists currently. And we've not found any charity yet that is as inclusive globally that thinks about service in this way. So we're hoping that we can make a difference.
Hey, Ash, and I know I didn't include that in some of the possible questions that we might chat about today, but we talked a little bit about before we actually went on started recording. I would love for you to share with the audience too the efforts that you've been very recently involved in with helping to evacuate Afghan folks that you work with when you are on active duty in the military and their families. I would love for you to share, because again, to me, this is kind of contributes to this overarching theme of your charitable contributions to a global effort. I'd love for you to share, what you were recently involved with. And I know it took a lot of time, effort, and energy, but it was something you were very passionate about, how you helped evacuate deserving Afghan families from Afghanistan during the recent incidents that took place there.
Well, I played only a small role within a much bigger team, but I spent about 4 years in Afghanistan, so I've got to know a lot of people very well and seen at firsthand the loyal service that they provided us, the UK and the international community. We did a lot with them, and they've never asked for anything from us. But when obviously the situation in Afghanistan turned out the way it did, we made commitments to some of those folks that we would get them out. And because the systems, US similarly, were so overwhelmed by the numbers, we only had to look at the TV screens to see the tragic sort of humanitarian crisis unfold. It was clear that not everybody was going to get out probably while the flights were running. So a bunch of us sort of informally running amateur operations from our offices around the world were connecting on all the different apps that exist now to share location and information, to try and see who we knew that we might be able to save those people that would be most at risk. So the most highly trained, the most decorated, high profile folks in the government, were clearly going to be the most vulnerable. And so we just pulled together, and, it was an incredibly heartwarming experience to be able to leverage, in my case, friends from different agencies in the US and people I'd met, in some cases many years ago, who you suddenly realized were also trying to do the same thing. And this community, this informal community, pulled together to kind of support the official community working really hard at the front end as well, to see if there was any way we could do more. And I'm certainly proud of the efforts of all the people that I was working with to move heaven and earth to try and get the most deserving people out in a pretty, tragic situation for all. And sadly, there are still many who are left. And so it's not over, and we mustn't forget them. While Afghanistan is falling rapidly out of the news cycle, for these people still in hiding, and those people that are still being looked for and hunted by the Taliban, there is no amnesty. There is only retribution for some of these folks. We owe it to them to honor the promises we made to them to try and help. So I'm still committed to doing that, and I've been doing a bit of fundraising and sort of a few charity events on the side that I know you've already been mean to me about.
Well, so what Ash is referring to is, and I actually want you to tell the story. So I'm not going to set this up. Well, I'm going to let you.
I can set it up, Howie. I can set it up. Allow me to set it up. So
nicely.
Ash, first off, but before I do set it up, the Unsung Foundation, where can people go to get more information on that?
We've got a website, unsungfoundation.org, but we haven't launched the kind of donate feature yet. We're about to hopefully announce a strategic partnership with a pretty exciting group in the next week or so. And on the back of that, then we'll be kind of opening it up more formally. But you can go in there and see what it is we're planning to do, and who's involved, just to get a sense. And then, people, please reach out if you want to know more. We can always send you stuff.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure.
And we'll be sure to include that information when we post this episode. We'll be sure to include that information as well, Ash.
And we got all the social media. So I'm Ash Alex-Cooper, and Unsung Foundation is Unsung Global is our handle on all the socials as well. So.
Yeah, I want to make sure the audience knew where they could learn more about this, because whether they listen to this at the debut of the episode or long into the future, I want them to be able to find that. The other thing too about that organization, again, before we transition here, is look, I always say this, I love sports. I'm a sports guy, but athletes have never been my heroes, right? Those that serve have always been my heroes. And you make a great point. It's not just limited to the military, is it? It could be a firefighter, it could be a police officer, it could be a nurse, a doctor, especially over the last 2 years. So, we have this conversation all the time about how our priorities are messed up, and that's true. But I love that you've created something that shines a light on those people.
Yeah, and we mustn't forget the families. There is a thing called secondary trauma, where if I'm the firefighter and I'm going off, the cell phone rings and off I go to a burning building that, family knows that's where you're headed. They are, almost as equally traumatized by the knowledge that you might not come home. Right. So we mustn't forget that, for every individual who might be in the uniform, there is generally a support network there that is, in some cases, equally, if not more affected by some of the experiences, by not having the ability to influence the situation or the outcomes. That's the challenging thing. People feel helpless, but they just have to wait, and that's really tough.
Yeah, and that's we're going to get to this in a minute, but that's also part of the largest stigma surrounding mental fitness. And, we've said this. I've actually started, Howie, I don't know if you and I have had this conversation. I've started saying mental fitness more now than mental health, because people can comprehend physical fitness as going to the gym and how important it is to stay in shape physically. And I realized that, mental fitness is the exact same thing, if not more important. We don't spend the time to go to the gym for our mind, or there's a stigma around it about, like you just said, like, what about spouses, right? When their husbands or wives get deployed, what about the children? And this is assuming they come back. And it's true with police officers and firemen and again, the doctors and nurses and medical workers who have been putting themselves in harm's way for a couple of years here. So listen, let's turn to a lighter note real quick, because Howie was right. I actually had this set up. So every episode, Ash, our guests get a book title. So I listen to the conversation very carefully, and I come up with a title for your book, should you ever write a book, like a biography, whatever. And it's funny because your title is a little more serious. It's not a funny title, but some of the chapters are funny. All right. So the title of your book is Adaptable. All right. I think if I was going to read a book by you, it's Adaptable by Ash Alexander-Cooper. I love what you said about agility and innovation. Right. I think that was insanely a great way of putting it. But chapter 1 in Adaptable is titled How to Run a Marathon in a Dinosaur Costume. And I think we need. I
would say don't.
That's the whole chapter. Yeah, but maybe the chapter is how not to run a marathon in a dinosaur costume. But Howie, I believe that's what you're alluding to, and Ash. I would like to talk about that for a minute, because this man that you're looking at or listening to decided to run a marathon. I'm guessing it was a T-Rex. All right, that's a T-Rex. Yeah, that's pretty much the go-to costume. And I'm sure it looked hilarious, but it probably didn't feel hilarious. So why don't you tell the people about what you did?
Yeah, it didn't look hilarious from the inside, maybe from the outside, perhaps. So basically, firstly, I had been ignoring emails that had been coming in for several months from the London Marathon, and I assumed it was spam, just trying to get me to sign up, until my number arrived, and I realized that it wasn't kind of spam, and or someone else had signed me up for it, but I had no recollection of doing it. So that was the first panic. And realization that you have to
be adaptable. See, this is playing into my book title here even more.
So I thought, well, I've taken a place, I might as well do it. It was the virtual London Marathon, so they had because it wasn't going to happen in person, and then it ended up happening in person, but there were 40,000 running in person and 40,000 running around the world virtually. So I was one of the virtual participants, and because I've been helping this Afghan family, when they came with nothing, the grandkids or the young kids who were 6 and 10, they had no toys. They literally came with the clothes they were wearing. So when I met them, when they came out of quarantine, I asked them what they would like as a soft toy, so they'd have something to cuddle when they went to bed. And one said they wanted a sheep, one wanted an elephant, and one said dinosaur. And then I had the idea with my partner. I thought, well, maybe I could run as one of, an animal or something in costume. And I typed marathon costumes, and up came T-Rex. But I didn't do again, maybe I'm not that good as a leader, because I didn't do the fine print to kind of thing. In my mind, I thought there'd be a grill that I could breathe out of, and there would be fresh air and stuff. But an inflatable dinosaur outfit requires a little fan in the side to blow air in, but not very much air. And you're basically recirculating your own air, and it's kind of hot and uncomfortable and sweaty. So I was kind of committed because I said I was going to do it, and I went on social media to say I was going to do it. That sort of, I guess, it's my own worst enemy. So yeah, long story long is that I ran the London Marathon, an inflatable dinosaur costume, to raise money for support our Afghans, and we're currently nearly $100,000, £60,000.
Like the key to the story is you did it. That's very
yeah. And I went for a little swim in the River Thames.
Yeah, I did I did a 5K one time,
and I ran with an Afghan flag as my cape. So I was a Cape Crusader T-Rex, and then the kids came with their dinosaurs to the finish line to see me finish, which was cute.
Oh, so that's a special moment. You have a big smile on your face, and you learned a lot. Probably not to do it again. One time I did a 5K for a hockey team, and it was virtual, and they said you can do it however you want. So I skated the whole thing, and it went by really quick and painlessly. But I don't think I'd have the guts to wear a dinosaur suit. So God bless you for doing that, Ash. And again, you said it. You have to be adaptable. Howie, was that a good transition? Did you like?
It was perfectly, absolutely perfect.
All right, so. Ash, listen, getting back to kind of the topic at hand here, our parent organization, Pivotal Moments, we're all about, changing the stigma around mental fitness worldwide. And the truth is this, everyone deals with it, right? There's a lot of ego out there, but we all struggle with it at our own times to varying degrees. And if you're comfortable sharing it, and you did a little bit before, have you had any struggles with your own mental fitness or seen others struggle with it? And again, I think it is amazing that with everything you've seen and experienced, you seem to be in a good place. That's not true of everyone, as you know. So could you share more about kind of the experiences or the ones that that have struggled with it, and how did you manage it, and what do you do to strengthen your own mental fitness and stay even keel all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky, as I said, that I'm not affected really by the military service. I mean, I came from a pretty unpleasant childhood experience, a lot of trauma in the family, which I think probably started my path of being resilient, or learning to be resilient and not relying on other people to do everything for me or to make everything better. Sort of having to work out coping strategies to just get through stuff. And I similarly at school had a few challenges, and then obviously the military, it was varied, let's say, with the experiences, some incredible. I mean, I guess always had the attitude that experiences, good and bad, is what makes a life rich. And I wouldn't, even though I've been shot, as I said, and other things, and lost a lot of friends, I would love to bring them back. But in terms of what's happened to me personally or physically, I wouldn't change a thing, because I've learned far more from the mistakes I've made, or the injuries I've picked up, or the sad things or the challenging times, to really appreciate and learn and be able to take more advantage of the good times and appreciate them more. But as a leader, I'm very, very aware of the triggers or the signs in others. And, having particularly worked in the mental health space a little bit now, in an amateur way, at least, through charities, because I'm not professionally qualified in this way, but I'm very mindful always of keeping an eye on others. That's kind of leadership, right? You worry about other people before yourself. And so I think what's got me through a lot of the most traumatic things that I've seen, I mean, one incident in one country where a guy, 10 feet in front of me, stood on a legacy anti-tank mine and just, virtually disappeared. And I went round, once we cleared, made sure there were no other mines, went round looking for bits of him to put in a bag, so we'd have something to give to his family to bury. Now, that was really important. So although horrific, looking at the things you're picking up, I won't say what they were, but, bits of him. I was just singularly focused on this. I've got to do this rather than delegating to someone else, because I want to make sure that family has somebody to bury, and we treat him with respect, whatever's left of him. So I think that's the case of a lot of leaders. Generally, if you think about your people, it's a very privileged position to be in a leadership role, and you're there. Serve to lead is the motto from Sandhurst. You're there to serve others. You might be in that leadership position, but it's purely so you can serve those who wittingly or unwittingly follow you into difficult situations. So the more I spend time working with veterans and mental health charities, and I've recently got involved in a veterans trauma group here in the UK, as an advisor, the more equipped I feel I am to spot the signs and try and help others. But some of this is really simple stuff. At the end of the day, it's just reaching out to people. And it goes back to my relationship network thing is, just think routinely, frequently, who are the people that you haven't heard from? Maybe there's a reason that they've just dropped off the radar. Just check in. And I've been incredibly lucky and to have so many friends that would routinely check in on me, and I'm lucky to be able to say I'm good, but how are you? And that's been really helpful. I think the stigma can start by people just making sure that it's a conversation that can be had first and foremost. That mental health and mental fitness is something that should be a regular conversation. It shouldn't be for the most damaged, or if you say that you are struggling in whatever way, that suddenly that's a stigma that you feel you can't deal with. We've got to just normalize the conversation and recognize that everybody has their own challenges. Some are more or less acute, but we all deal with them in different ways. And let's learn from each other, support each other, and we'll be far richer for it.
It's a phenomenal answer, Ash, and I agree with you 100%. And, it's servant leadership you're talking about. And then when it comes to normalizing the conversation, you're absolutely right. And we're seeing this play out in sports. We're seeing it play out in the military right now, that it's okay to not be okay. Yeah. And I think that, we're coming to a point now, specifically with social media, which has been a human highlight reel for the last 15 years, that, we're starting to realize that that's not reality. It's not reality, right? People have problems. And the last thing I want to reiterate that you said is that, you don't have to be at rock bottom to be dealing with this stuff. All right. Now, don't get me wrong. Nothing fun about rock bottom, and there's people that need help at that level. But even myself, I feel successful. I feel blessed. Even at times I deal with it, right? And I have no problem admitting that. I've dealt with it recently, right? It's just, you have to be aware of it. You have to be okay talking with it. And above all, I think you said this, you have to find the people that can support you, and you have to support other people. Like my dog is trying to support me right now, if you can hear him barking in the background. All right. But you have to support each other. And again, if we don't care about each other, what's the point? We say it all the time. And I say this all the time on business shows, sports shows, this show. It's not what you do, it's who you do it with. Right. So if we're not taking care of each other, what the hell are we doing? Right. We're going to work ourselves to death. It doesn't take much, like you just said, right? How are you today? And really mean it, whether you're a leader or not. Is there anything I can do for you?
I also have relied on not just humans, but my dog has been incredibly important in the sort of the not dark times, but where I've been struggling the most with the challenges that I've faced. That when you've got a dog that's kind of wagging its tail going, come on, let's go for a walk, when the last thing you feel like doing is going for a walk, everything is always better from just going outside and just change of scenery. Yeah. And so now when if I know friends that are struggling, I say, come on, let's meet up, let's go for a walk. I really don't feel like it at the moment. Can we do it next week? Right. That to me is the trigger, or the indicator and warning that now is the time you really do need to go outside. Right. Because if you're saying, I don't feel like it, let's leave it a week, that's because you're in a space that we need to kind of change somehow to make you just realize that there's another way.
And Ash, I think, you said it best right there. It's amazing. And I really mean that word. It's amazing how walking outside for 5 minutes can completely change your demeanor, your mindset, or at least set you on a path towards a better direction. Right. And we punish ourselves as routinely. I have to get this done. I have to do this. And it's like, man, and Howie and I took a course about this. 2 minutes, 5 minutes of just changing your mental space can make a world of difference in how you accomplish what you need to do. And I think you're just bringing up amazing points here when it comes to the arena of mental fitness. And I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm with you about dogs too, Ash. I think I love dogs more than I love people.
Yeah,
I've got 4 of them here at home.
56.
So and you know the unconditional love that a dog will bring to you, no matter what you're doing, what you're feeling. You know, they are there to just, I think that they just make you feel good all the time if you're open to that. So, hey, listen, I want to thank you so much, Ash. I know that there's a significant time difference between where we are and where you are. I really applaud so much of what you're doing personally, professionally. I know we've spoken about the Unsung Foundation, off camera. With Bob Morgan, and want to continue to do that as well. And we'll do that after this recording is over. But I just want, you bring, I think, a perspective that I think is incredibly valuable to our audience. And that's why I was so appreciative of you taking the time to be on our show with us. I think you brought up so many, I think, valuable perspectives, points, experiences that I think our audience can learn from, can leverage and take advantage of. And I really just thank you for taking the time to share them with us today.
That's my pleasure. It's been fun to join you guys, and keep up the good work. And hopefully, you can make a difference for those who just need a little bit of that guidance. There are ways through everything, whether it's finding that job or, getting out of a funk because, things have not gone your way. There's always a way through. Just take one step at a time and leverage that network, because there's somebody out there that can help for sure.
Great. Thank you so much, Ash.
We'll take your lead on that, man. And that's going to do it for this episode of Life After the Military, which again is powered by Pivotal Moments. You can learn more about the organization at pivotalmoments.org. We have a ton of inspirational content, education. You can donate. You can find all the episodes of this show. We've done plenty of them at this point, and we'd love for you to join us on that network. So for Howie Cohen and Ash Alexander-Cooper, I'm Lee Elias. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to keep an eye out for more episodes wherever podcasts can be heard. And we will talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.